swan boats and daisy chains. Can't seem to recall my true given name. I see my footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that yesterday or only a moment ago? My heart is gone. I've gone cold. My heart is gone.
Welcome to the social-engineer.org podcast number 86.
86?
86.
How did we get here?
I know. It's kind of cool. 86 months of doing this. And it's a pretty special month for me. This is not why it's special, but it's just you and I today, Michelle.
I'm a little bit lonely, actually. You know, it's nice to have Ping and Dave when they make it.
It is. Well, actually, we're going to give them both an excuse today. Ping is not well, so we are sending her happy thoughts and hoping that she recovers quickly. She has a very valid excuse, and so does Dave, because even though this podcast will come out after Derby, we are recording it the day before everyone is traveling to go to Derby. So
He's probably on fire as we speak. I can't imagine.
I imagine he's running around the hotel, irritating people, hugging everyone, getting things set up.
I hear there's going to be clowns. I don't know. I just hear a rumor.
I was thinking of actually hiring like 3 or 4 clowns to just surround me at all times, because they don't freak me out like they freak Dave out, and that way he would just leave me alone.
But you don't want him to leave you alone. Don't you at least want a good Dave hug?
Is there such a thing? Is there a thing?
Yeah. Maybe once or twice.
Once or twice. Yeah, you're right. I do love the guy. Now, so talking of which, we will be heading to Derby this week, even though it will be over by the time you're listening to this. So let me tell you what you may have seen if you were there or what you may have missed. Our class sold out in, I think Dave told me it was 16 hours.
It was crazy. Yeah.
I was really impressed. I mean, Derby is just like a marketing machine right now. So when they launch it, I think everything sells out within a second. That's pretty cool, though. I mean, it's nice to have seen that. So we have a pretty full class. I'm really excited to see how that goes. I'm just going to assume it's going to be awesome like the others. So we're just going to say it was amazing.
Yeah, we'll just say that now. It was amazing.
I'm prophesying. And this is the first year for something big for us at Derby. We are running an actual SE village. So a little different than what we do at DEF CON, but it is a whole room devoted just to social engineering. We're going to have our polygraph challenge, as well as Mission SE Impossible, which is totally revamped for Derby. So if you were there, you got a chance to see the awesomeness. And if you weren't, look forward to it for next year, because if it was successful, then hopefully the Derby crew will invite us back for next year. And of course, we're sponsoring DerbyCon this year. We're one of the sponsors. So excited about all of that DerbyCon has to offer.
Yeah. And as far as I know, we're still going to have sharks with lasers, right?
Oh, yes.
I mean, that was sort of the requirement. Okay, good.
There better be sharks with lasers. That's all I got to say. So, Brian, you better bring the sharks with lasers. That's all there is to it. Okay, let's see. We got some training coming up, and it's important to talk about because people have been emailing and asking about what's the rest of this year. There is only one training left this year that has any space available, and that is our Advanced OSINT for Social Engineers class. It is in Bristol, UK, December 1st and 2nd. So I know it's December, and I know it's cold, and I know it's the UK. I get all that. But if you want the training, and you've been emailing us, and you've been asking, that is the only class left for 2016, which will easily slide us right into 2017, which will be our first class. And now this is important because we get this question all the time. There are only 3 APSE classes for all of 2017 that are going to be public. And the first is in Orlando on February 6th through 10th. Then the second is in Bristol, June 5 through 9. And the third is to be decided because it's if we get invited back to Black Hat, which we hope we will, then it will be at Black Hat. And if not, then we will hold one somewhere else in the fall. So those are your only 3 chances to take APSE this year or next year, 2017. So I really suggest signing up. And I know this is a terrible tease, but MLSE, we launched it again and it totally sold out in under 3 weeks.
So you're basically saying We had registration, but you can't come.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not nice, is it? It's a little mean, isn't it?
It's taunting, yes.
Yes, no. And actually, I've had people beg me and offer extra money to let them come to the class even though they weren't APSE students.
Well, we'll take bribes. It just, it
We'll
just
take
doesn't necessarily mean you
Right,
get
that's right. It doesn't mean you'll get what you want, but we'll take the bribes. But, that's a good point. We'll take bribes in money or chocolate for Michelle or cake for Michelle. She'll take cake bribes.
Pies work as well.
Pies, anything that's sweet and edible, she'll take. But the issue is, guys, you got to be APSE student. You graduate from APSE, everything's good, and then you can get invited to MLSE, and we only do one a year, only in Orlando, and only 12 students. And people keep asking me, why are all those onlys? Well, when you actually find out what MLSE is all about, you will understand clearly why we can only do 12 and why we only do it in Orlando. And I know that's also a big tease, but that is just the way it is. Come to an APSE class and you will find out all the answers you want. Now, people have been asking, where can I see Michelle? There is a Michelle sighting.
No one has been asking that. What?
That has happened. That has happened. Someone has asked me because you didn't speak at DEF CON this year. And I had a couple people get mad at me. I actually had someone come up to me and tell me that I was a sexist pig because I didn't let you speak because you're a woman.
No. I sacrificed my speaking spot for a friend, and I think it was a great decision.
I think it was a great decision, too. We really helped him out. He needed that spot, and you were very kind and generous to do that. So if you want to see Michelle without her sexist pig boss around her, then it's October 20.
Oh, yeah, that's right.
Yeah, Grace Hopper. You are
in wonderful Houston, Texas.
It is, and you are doing a really cool event, this celebration of women in computing, and you're on a panel with some other really great women and Dave.
And Dave.
I don't know how that works, other great women and Dave.
He somehow finagled his way onto the ladies' panel, which, I've got to give him props for that.
Yeah, seriously. I'm actually confused by it a little bit, but, I guess if you're going to have anyone there, it could be Dave. That's pretty cool for him, and it will be a really great event. I'm actually excited about you being at that event. It seems like everything online is a really nice event with a lot of good turnout. So that's October 20th in Houston, Texas. If you're going to be around there and you want to cite Michelle, then you can go and say hi to her there. Okay, what else do we have going on? Is that it?
It's already September, man.
Yeah, wow. So you know what that means? Fourth quarter is starting. There was a time when the company was smaller and it was just Michelle and Amanda and I, that fourth quarter meant relaxing. We can take it a little easy. But fourth quarter no longer means that. Fourth quarter means set your head on fire and run around screaming.
And catching everything else on fire.
Yes. Yeah, that's basically what fourth quarter means. So that's going to be us. So I guess that's what we'll look forward to. But something really exciting is happening today on the podcast. Way back in 2012, if you can believe that. I actually thought it was only a couple years, but I looked at my email. Way back in 2012, I had emailed this gentleman and asked him, and through his crew, if we can get him to come on the podcast. And just between writing books and speaking and training and traveling, it never worked out. We couldn't get him to come on. Finally, he just had another book come out. I mean, literally, it just got the pre-release sitting on my desk right now. It just came the other day. And we worked out a time to have him on, and it is Dr. Robert Cialdini. Now, I am super excited about this because Michelle and I, we train. One day of our class is actually devoted to the 6 principles of influence that he came up with and wrote in his first book called Influence. And it's a very pivotal book, in my opinion, for what we do, putting some science behind actually influencing people. And his new book is called Pre-Suasion. So we're going to actually get him on the podcast to talk about his work and all the research he's done and his books. Dr. Robert Cialdini, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, Chris.
Really excited to have you here. We've been talking about your work in our classes and our podcast probably, I don't know, Michelle, 5-6 years now?
Yes.
So it's a real honor to have you here, and I'm sure a lot of people, our listeners, will feel the same way once we get into our conversation. So thank you again for making the time.
I'm looking forward to it.
First, I think it's important to start off just with a little bit of history, just to give our listeners a little bit of background on who you are and how you got to where you are today. Because I think what's fascinating for me in reading your story is that you didn't really start off with this goal of becoming one of the world's leading social psychologists. You were actually a pro athlete. Is that true?
I was almost a pro athlete. In high school, I was a pretty good baseball player, good enough to get an offer to play minor league baseball for the Chicago White Sox. And the scout who was going to sign me to a contract, I wanted to be the next Mickey Mantle or Willie Mays center fielder. And he asked me a crucial question. He said, "How good at school are you?" I said, I'm pretty good. He said, "Could you go to college?" I said, "Yes." "Could you graduate from college, do you think?" I said, "Yes." He said, "Go to school, kid. You're going to make it through college. The chances that you'll make it to the majors are very slim." He did something that I'll never forget against his best interest, because who knows, maybe, if some fluke happened, I'd get to the majors and his reputation for signing me would be burnished. But he said, "No, follow your strengths." Chris, you know what a slider is? Michelle, you know what a slider is in baseball? It's a pitch that, when it comes off the pitcher's hand, looks like it's a fastball. And right at the end, it breaks like a curve.
I would not have known that.
Well,
my husband played baseball, so yes, I've heard tell of these legendary pitches.
I couldn't hit it. I couldn't hit a slider. And the truth is, as I moved up through the leagues, I would have seen better and better sliders. And I wouldn't have gotten where I wanted to go. And this scout recognized that. And he said, "Go to your strengths, kid." I will always be grateful to him for that. And so I went into psychology because I was always intrigued by human behavior. Even before I went on to school, even as a high school student, I remember reading in the newspaper, these stories of what scientists have found, anthropologists and astronomers and so on. Well, the psychologists, it always seemed to me, were doing the most interesting research, asking the most interesting questions about human behavior. So that's the direction I took.
And that's fascinating, because it's not often that you hear somebody who could have had that pro sports career, but your second love was psychology. So quite an interesting mix.
That's right. But as a teenager, of course, I was interested in the bright lights. It took somebody with perspective to send me down the right path.
Just a side question. You ever get to talk to that guy again, that recruiter?
No, he's passed away. I mean, I followed him, and interesting name. The guy was named Bunny Brief. Bunny Brief. Anyway, he was a former Major League Baseball player, and he was then a scout. But I saw that he passed away, maybe 20 or 30 years ago.
It would have been interesting to meet up with him and say, "Look what your advice did for me and the world."
Yeah, I always regretted that I didn't get to shake his hand for what he allowed me to recognize.
So the question is, did you ever learn to hit the slider?
I never tried to learn because I never had the chance. I went on to school. I didn't even go out for the baseball team in college.
Wow.
I became a student. I needed to focus there.
Wow. That is serious focus then, right?
It is.
So now we have this, you left baseball, you're in college, you're interested in psychology, but what makes you go from that interest to actually researching influence and how it works?
Yeah, it requires that I go back again to before I ever went to school. And I recognized early on in my life that I was a sucker for the pitches of various kinds of sales operators or fundraisers who would approach me, come to my door, stop me on the street, these kinds of things. And, I would wind up buying things I didn't really want, contributing to causes I had never really heard about. I remember after one of those instances, someone had come to my door and got me to contribute to some cause, and it had to do with children's health or children's education. I can't even remember what it was. And he brought his daughter with him, like a 5 or 6-year-old little girl. I didn't know if he was legitimate. I didn't know anything about this. I couldn't say no in front of his daughter. And it occurred to me, wow, the way this guy arranged for me to say yes to his request didn't have to do with the merits of the request as I saw it. It had to do with the circumstances in which he delivered the request. He arranged the circumstances so that I said yes for reasons outside of the merits of his case. Well, that's interesting. That's worth studying.
And this is before you were in studying psychology that this event happened?
I was in the university, but I wasn't a psychology major yet. And I thought, well, this is worth studying as an interesting question that would satisfy my curiosity about this, but might actually provide a career path, a professional direction.
So you look at that situation, you're obviously analyzing it, very analytical, and you see that the setup made it almost impossible for you to reject whatever he was asking for because of the way he set up the situation.
Yeah.
That makes you think, I need to research how that worked.
Yeah, and there's an interesting feature of that, which is it also applies to the new book that I've just finished writing called Pre-Suasion. It's what you do first, what you set up in the situation first that inclines people to say yes to the message that they haven't even received yet. I tell a story at the beginning of the book of how I came to write the book in the time frame that I did. I had gone to another university than my own, to a business school on a leave of absence. I had no teaching responsibilities. I was at another university. I was going to write this book while I was there at that university for a year. Before I did, I was in negotiations with the associate dean about the office that I could have, the computer that would be in the office, various kinds of parking privileges, phone privileges, library privileges, and so on. And he called me one day and he said, Bob, I've got good news. We got you that office in the corridor where you wanted, where your colleagues are located. The computer in there is more powerful than what you asked for. Don't worry about phone and parking and library. We'll take care of all of that. And I said, well, thank you, Joel. I really appreciate that. And he waited a count. And he said, you know what, Bob? There's something I would really appreciate from you. We have a sudden need to teach a marketing course for our MBAs. We just had somebody who got sick and can't do it. Could you do it for us while you're here? Now, I knew, because I had never taught a marketing course, I had never taught in business school, I had never taught MBAs. This was going to require preparing an entire new course with lectures and readings and exercises and exams. And it would torpedo the chance that I could write this book while I was there. But in the moment, after he had given me all these things, I couldn't say no. He had just set it up so that I owed him. I can only be glad he didn't need a kidney.
Yeah. As you're telling the story, I'm thinking to myself, okay, there's got to be an ask coming, right? Because it was just too perfect. It was too perfect.
So while I didn't write the book then, I got this great story to tell that essentially validates the thesis of the book, that very often the thing that determines whether we say yes or no to a request is not the content of the request. It's what we do in the moment before we deliver it that leverages the change.
So how do you go about researching influence, though? So like these stories are great. And now, because I read your book and we talk about your work all the time, I can clearly see, reciprocity, and that I can see all the different principles that you talk about, but they didn't exist at that time. So how do you go from these experiences to actually researching how influence works and giving it 6 different labels?
So let me give you 2 answers to that, because there are 2 forms of research that I engaged in. The first was the one that I was familiar with. By this time, I was a university professor, and I was trying to research and publish on the topic of influence and persuasion. Right? So we would do a study. For example, I live in the Phoenix, Arizona area, and we went door to door asking people to contribute to the United Way. And for half of them, we gave the standard appeal that the United Way gave in their door-to-door campaigns. Right? We did this in conjunction with them, so we weren't stepping on their toes or anything. And they gave us their marketing and materials and how they approach, what they should say to somebody about the good works of the United Way and why we should donate, why people should donate. Okay, we did that for half of the homes. And for the other half of the homes, we added 5 words. First, we said, we're here for the United Way. Even a penny of contribution would help. And then we delivered the evidence for why you should donate to the United Way. And we went from 30% people making a contribution to 50%, 55%, 55% of the people making a contribution by just saying even a penny would help. Because how do you say no to somebody who says even a penny is acceptable? You can't say no. What kind of person would you be not to give a penny, right? Well, here's the thing. No one gave a penny.
Right.
Not what you do for a legitimate charity organization. So we got everybody giving about the same amount that they normally give to charity.
That was my question. Were the donations lower because of those 5 words?
That's the crucial question, and they weren't. Because there are 2 stages to this. One is, will I donate? And the second is, how much should I donate? Well, will I donate depends on the way the request is provided. How much has to do with the norms that are established for what you give to a legitimate charity like the United Way. And those norms took over to determine the amount of the contribution. So we got the same average contribution, but we went from 30% to 55% of the people willing to give that contribution.
So now, just as an aside, did the United Way set the norms? Or were the norms sort of internal to the individuals?
Yes, Michelle, they were internal to the individual. We all know what constitutes. I mean, we know that a penny isn't legitimate. It's not what you give. So they went back to another set of norms, the internal ones that they'd always established for themselves.
Very interesting.
And decided. So that's one kind of study we would do to unpack what are the factors that cause people to say yes. Then there was another one that after several years of doing this kind of research, I recognized, wait a minute, there are people who know what works because their livelihoods depend on it. Salespeople, fundraisers, recruiters, marketers, public relations specialists, lobbyists, and so on. Their business involves getting other people to say yes to them. What have they found? Well, you can't just go and ask them because that's proprietary information. They don't want that to be known to their competitors. So what I began to do is to answer ads in the newspaper. In those days, it was the newspaper for trainees in these various professions. And I became a kind of spy of sorts. I infiltrated their training programs to learn from the inside which are the most effective strategies for getting people to move in your direction in all of these professions. So I learned how to sell cars from a lot. I learned how to sell insurance from an office. I learned how to sell portrait photography over the phone. I learned how to sell encyclopedia door to door. In each of those cases, I looked for what they were telling us to do and what was in common wherever they were training people to get others to say yes. What was in common? And what I found was there were only 6 things. They were the 6 universal principles of influence that I found there and that I talk about in my book. Now, there were hundreds, maybe thousands of tactics that we were trained to employ, but the principles that undergirded those tactics were very few. There were just 6.
Well, I think what's interesting to me is these 6 principles appear to have remained consistent sort of throughout time. And according to my understanding of your research, they apply to all of us. But the particular principle that seems to work tends to be culturally bound, I guess. So folks in Asia respond more to a type of influence as opposed to people in the West. That in and of itself is really interesting, but I'm curious if you've seen any changes in terms of sort of how we've evolved as a culture and whether or not, globalization has changed. Have you made any sort of observations about any changes in those 6 principles over time?
I think your insight is right on target. That is, these principles are universal in that they work in all cultures and even all subcultures, but the weights, the priorities associated with them will change from culture to culture. So in the Far East, authority is very important. In the Mediterranean countries, friendship is very important. In Scandinavian and German cultures, commitment and consistency are extremely important. So it's not like the other ones don't work in those countries. It's just the one at the top changes. Sure. As we go from culture to culture. But your second question is, has there been a change in terms of the priorities associated with the 6 principles sort of in general because of what's happened in terms of technology and globalization and so on in the world? And here's, I think, the one thing that I've recognized. The principle that has become more prominent and the one that is more powerful these days than when I first began studying them is the one that I call social proof. The idea that if a lot of other people like me are doing something or recommending something or believing something, then it's probably something that will work for me too. The psychology of the crowd. There was this great study I saw in a research article from Beijing. A restaurant owner, a restaurant manager can significantly increase the percentage of people who choose any particular item on the menu by putting a little asterisk next to it that says, not what you would think. This is the chef's special, or this is the specialty of the house. No, this is one of our most popular dishes. That's what the asterisk stood for. And each one immediately became 13 to 20% more popular. What I love about that study is that this was entirely costless. It was entirely ethical. They just pointed to those things that were popular. And yet, we almost never see that. People don't use it. What we see on restaurant menus are those other things that I mentioned. The chef's specials of the night. These are the specialties of the house. No, the principle of social proof says, tell people what a lot of others like them are doing or have been doing, and they will move in that direction too. This is what now allowed us to do like never before, to get information from various kinds of sites, user groups, review sites, and so on, where we can see what other people like us in our category have been choosing. And that moves us in that direction much more powerfully. I saw a statistic that was hard to believe, but according to one study, 93% of online buyers say that they check user reviews before they buy. 93%, you can't get 93% of any people to do anything. But they did this.
Well, that
That's
makes
how
a lot of sense.
powerful this is.
Sure, with social media, with just increased connectiveness. Chris and I, when we travel, I think that's the first thing we do is check reviews for a particular restaurant to say, where do we want to eat tonight. And so I think that's really fascinating, but definitely makes a lot of sense.
So with your find that social proof has been the one principle that has increased the most, do you think it's because of social media and the internet and how it's being used so much today?
I do. I don't think that social proof has somehow become more valid than it used to be. I think that it's just remarkably more accessible for us to
Sure.
get social proof about a particular product or idea that we simply couldn't get to it because these data come to us from all over the world. We never would have made contact with those opinions, those informants without the internet.
A question that was in my head that just from before, and I don't want to go back to it, but I need to ask this. All those different things that you learned, how to sell cars and encyclopedias and art and all that, did you learn all of those just for your research? Or was this actually just you got bored and moved on to a different career?
No, I learned them for my research. I thought to myself, look, if you're going to be studying the factors that incline people toward yes, there's a whole set of professions who have those answers already. They've acquired those answers through a grander experiment than you could ever conduct yourself, because they've had decades and decades of trial and error as to what works and what doesn't work. If you go into their training programs and find out what they've learned and see what lies in parallel across all of the training programs of all of these professions and see which they have in common, those must be the most powerful influences on the influence process. And that will allow you to take these into your research and test how they work, when they work, how to amplify them, and so on, right? But that was where I went to get the basic ideas first. And there's a very funny story that goes with this that represents, I think, a couple of things I learned. In order to be ethical about this, at the end of the training that I would take, remember I was undercover, I was incognito. They didn't know that I was a university professor studying what they were training their aspiring professionals to do. So I would always, at the end of the training, reveal my purposes and say, look, I got this information from you without your knowledge. So I will give you the opportunity to tell me that I can't use this information in my own writings. If you feel that that was inappropriate, then I will not use it in the book I'm writing. But I gave them a reason to comply. It was to say, but if you do allow me, I will pay you in the coin that you've paid me. That is, I will send you, what you've paid me is knowledge, information. So I will send you an early copy of my book. You'll get the information that I've gleaned from not just your organization, but from all kinds of organizations about what best works to move people in a particular direction, right? So it was the rule of reciprocity that I was applying, right? And I expected that I would get a good response from that. But here's what I didn't expect. Some of those people didn't even let me finish that argument. They said, wait a minute, you're a university professor and you want to learn from us? You mean you're the student and we're the teacher?
You validated them, huh?
They would puff up their chests and they would say, of course.
Yeah. Wow.
Because I gave them a role. It was the role of teacher. And of course, the role of teacher says you give information. That's what you do.
I think you answered my question, Bob, but I guess my follow on to the story is in all of your years of research into this area, was there anything that surprised you? Was there anything that you found that you really didn't expect to find with respect to the principles of influence?
Well, let me suggest the thing that has most rocked me back in my chair. with regard to this new book that I've written, which is Pre-Suasion, which says, if you put people in a particular state of mind immediately before you make your request, they will say yes to your request, provided that the state of mind is consistent with the strength of your request, with the feature of your request that you want them to respond to. Okay, so for example, there was a study. If you send people to a landing page for an online furniture store, if the background of that landing page has fluffy clouds in it, those people purchase more comfortable furniture. If the background has coins, pennies in it, they purchase less expensive furniture, because in one case you focus them on comfort as a mindset before they got into the message. The other case, you focus them on cost, on price, before they got into the message. So where you put them first channels them in a way that is consistent with the mindset that you've established.
So this really does illustrate the importance of then framing, careful framing of your requests.
Framing mindsets,
Sure.
states of mind, frames of mind, those are the literatures that I use to talk about this idea of persuasion. What you do first leverages the success of what you say next. Now, here's the thing that made me whistle under my breath when I read it. There was another study like this, and it had to do with the idea of how do we get people to be helpful and cooperative and feel like they're part of our team. Okay, they brought subjects into an experiment, and 1/3 of them were shown photographs that in the background had an individual standing alone. The other third saw in the background of these photographs 2 individuals standing apart, separate from one another. A third sample of the subjects saw 2 individuals standing shoulder to shoulder in a togetherness, teamwork, cooperative kind of posture, okay, with the idea of working together or being together was the mindset. Now, the researcher in all of those cases then got up from the table and accidentally, I'm putting that in air quotes, spilled a bunch of items onto the floor. And the question is, who gets down to help her? Who becomes her partner, her helpmate in all of this? And the answer was clear. Those individuals who saw 2 people standing together in the imagery of those photographs were 3 times more likely to get down on their knees spontaneously and begin helping. All right. Now, that's not the thing that made me have to read this study 3 times to believe it. Here's what it was. The subjects in this study were 18 months old.
Huh. Wow.
They were babies. And this process is so elemental, so primitive in us that it got 18-month-old children to triple the likelihood that they would be helpful if they first saw people standing in a togetherness posture.
Wow. That is fascinating.
That's what knocked me back in my chair when I read it.
That is fascinating. So from our view, for what we do for work, obviously these same principles could be used by bad people to get someone to make a decision that they shouldn't make.
Yep.
So how does someone protect against that? Like, how do you protect, we use the term pretexting, which is very similar to what you call persuasion, and when attackers want to, let's say, break into a building, they'll make sure their outfits, their clothes, their language, the tools they carry all match the part that they're playing. So if I'm supposed to be an elevator repairman, then you'll look that part, sound that part.
Right.
More often than likely, the security guy will just let you through because, you look that part.
Right.
How do you instruct people to protect themselves from negative uses of these principles?
When you recognize yourself willing to say yes to someone at elevated levels, more than you should, more than is the norm, more than you're supposed to, right? Stop right there. Use that as the flag. I'm about to say yes to this guy, and I have no evidence that he's who he says he is. As soon as you recognize you're about to say yes at elevated levels to what is normal, stop yourself and go back and ask, what is the evidence that I have? If I don't have it, let me ask for it. And now with Pre-Suasion, I'm saying, don't just ask yourself what he has requested of you. Ask yourself what he has said or done or arranged before he's requested it of you. How is he dressed? What has he said to you first? How has he created a mindset that would make it easy for you to say yes at those elevated levels without thinking?
So it's really teaching people to have some kind of thinking or critical thinking skills and not just to follow because it feels good or it feels the right way.
In fact, I always like the one where you're buying a car and boy, you like that salesman. Even though you've only known him for 20 minutes, use that as your cue. Use the elevated levels of liking or comfort with this person beyond what should be expected in that set of circumstances as your cue to stop and process. Because you'll be driving that Toyota off the lot, not the salesman. He's not coming with you. It's that Toyota that's going home with you. Yeah.
That's really good advice. Good advice.
You started out this interview talking about how you tended to say yes and tended to kind of, be a sucker for sales pitches, which I am as well. So I was curious, after all of this research, are you better at saying no?
Here's the answer to that. That's a textured answer. I'm better at saying no to things that I now perceive as likely to be deceptive or unethical.
That's a very political answer, it sounds like.
But I like it when people use these strategies on me honestly. If they honestly tell me about what authorities have to say about their product, if they honestly tell me about the social proof associated with their offer, that the fastest growing or largest selling or something, if they honestly tell me that this is scarce or rare or dwindling in availability, I want that information. The last time I bought a television set, I was in an appliance store, and I wasn't really looking for a set, but I was walking by the display, and I saw this set that got very good ratings, and it was on sale. And the salesman saw me looking at it. He came up, he said, I can see you're interested in this set at this price. I can see why. It's a great deal. But I have to tell you, it's our last one. And I just got a call from a woman in Scottsdale. She's on her way to get it. Chris, Michelle, 10 minutes later, I'm walking out of the store with that in my cart.
Scarcity works so good on all of us. And Michelle always tells stories of how much of us, she's got like 30 of those George Foreman grills because of that same thing.
Well, here's the thing. If he was honest, he did me a favor. So I got that great deal before it was gone. If he was making that up and they had 10 of these in the back room, then I was deceived. So I went back the next day to see if there was another one of those sets in that, and there wasn't. It was the last one. I'm grateful to that guy for using this principle of scarcity on me.
So the legitimate attempts to influence are actually stronger.
They are the ones that I want to say yes to.
Absolutely.
So, a question that we get all the time, and you would be the perfect guy to ask this, is what is the difference between influence and manipulation?
Yeah. For me, influence is to give people evidence that informs them into consent or educates them into compliance, right? Because it steers them correctly by telling them what truly is there in the situation that will make their situation better. Manipulation is to fabricate that information, to counterfeit it, to tell me that they have this thing and it's dwindling in availability. And if it's not, then I've been tricked into assent. I've been manipulated by these principles rather than educated by them into assent.
That is a fascinating definition, and one that is different than we've used, but I like it because, just to clarify, that means that influence can be both negative and positive.
Right. Here's a good example, again, taking the idea of persuasion. Do you happen to have a bottle of mineral water in front of you? As we talk a lot of times, there's a bottled water.
I don't. I have a glass of water, but not a bottle.
Okay, well, let's say you've got a bottle of mineral water, and I want to sell that to you. I can significantly increase the price you will pay for it if before I offer it to you, I ask you the distance to the sun. And there's research on this. Why? Because compared to the distance to the sun, the price of that bottle of water will seem minuscule.
Sure. So you've got the anchoring effect, right? You anchor on a number that may or may not relate at all to the request. Absolutely.
Precisely. And that's the key. I consider that unethical to do that because that number, the distance to the sun, is unrelated to the merits of that water. By ethical rules, I'm not allowed to sell you something by using a strategy that doesn't inform you about the genuine strengths of that product or service or idea, right? Now, instead, suppose I am entitled to say to you, here's our bottle of water. Just for your knowledge, we sold 3 million bottles of this water last year, okay? Now that number does tell me something about the merits, about the wisdom of the choice of that bottle. I'm entitled to that. I'm not entitled to the distance to the sun because it has nothing to do with the merits of that product.
That is fascinating. Okay, that may be the best answer we've had, Michelle.
I love it.
And it changes a lot of things for us, though, so we have to go back and analyze. We always try to, when we teach, because, we have to do some of these things as part of our job. We get paid to test some vulnerabilities. And when we teach our students to do these things, we always try to encourage them to use positive principles as opposed to negative.
I was on your website and I appreciated that very much.
Oh, thank you.
About your approach.
Thank you very much for that. Because, we tell people, like, look, there's enough bad guys out there, and sure, we can all play that part. But our mantra is leave them feeling better for having met you. So can you still test a vulnerability? Can you still break into a company or send a phishing email, but at the end of it, the person doesn't feel dirty, abused, violated? Can you do that? And if you can, then you've not only educated them and made them more secure, but you left them feeling good for doing it. So it's like a powerhouse.
Which means you have a partner now rather than an adversary in all of this. And somebody who wants to continue to do business with you.
I love that. Yes, and that's 100% true. We always ask our guests a couple questions at the end. Of course, your books are going to be on the list. So, your book Influence and your book Pre-Suasion, we definitely recommend it. But our listeners are big readers. So we want to know if there's other books that you recommend. It doesn't need to be about this topic, just books that you've read that you said, these are powerful books and I suggest people read them.
Yes, I have a list of the top 5 books for influence anyway that have influenced me. And I have to go way back to Aristole and his Rhetoric, which was the first one that showed me that there was a systematic approach to the communication process to make your communications more successful, not just in being clearly understood, but in actually moving people in your direction. Then there was a book called Hidden Persuaders that was in the 50s by a guy named Vance Packard that showed how advertisers use these psychological strategies in often unrecognized ways to move us. There's a book called Nudge by Thaler and Sunstein that showed that it's possible to use these strategies not just to get people to move in directions of commercial choices of one sort or another, but to move in directions that will enhance their lives as citizens of a society, and how large-scale programs can move people in those ways so that they're healthier and happier and so on. Then there's a book called Persuasive Advertising by a guy named J. Scott Armstrong, who looks at all of the research that examined what constitutes an effective ad. He wrote this compendium of research and studies that have detailed what constitutes an effective advertising. Persuasive advertising, J. Scott Armstrong. He's an academic at the Wharton School. Now, it's kind of written academically, so that one is kind of something you have to wade through. And then there's finally To Sell is Human by Daniel Pink, who shows us how selling not just products and services, but convincing people to move in our direction. That's a very human trait, and it goes to almost everything that we do with our friends, with our family, with our neighbors, with our coworkers, and so on. And it applies across the boundaries of human activity.
Boy, this is a phenomenal list. Usually we get like one book, so this is great to have that many. And plus your original book, Influence, and now Pre-Suasion. We'll add all of those to the show notes. I had just the other day, I got my pre-order. It was one of those early orders on Persuasion, so I'm just starting it now, especially now after getting your great intro into it with this conversation. Really looking forward to delving into that. If some of the listeners want to follow you or find out more about you, I know you have some classes that your company teaches. What's the best way for them to find out more about your work?
Sure. We have a website, influenceatwork.com. Influence at Work is all one word, .com. And on that site, they can get access to information about our training programs, our keynote presentations, our books, and so on.
Excellent. Bob, I honestly cannot thank you enough. I would love to let this podcast go out for a while, let people listen to it, and have you back on after the book's been out for a while and have another conversation about how it's being used. That would just be phenomenal.
I'll tell you, I appreciated the quality of the questions I got. They were really very thoughtful and got me into the heart of the material where I needed to be.
Thank you so much for your time today.
So long for now.
Okay, Michelle, that's going up there with one of my favorites.
Yeah, always interesting to talk to researchers, and even though the topics aren't new, the information that they find is always interesting and keeps itself new and keeps itself fresh and relevant.
And you know what's going to happen? This is going to be really bad for you and I, is all of our students are going to be like probably emailing and spanking us now because they'll be like, you guys use manipulation, not influence, according to his definition.
No, we talk about everybody's definitions, and I think applications are different and intentions are different as well. And so I think his definitions are really interesting and relevant and make sense in his role as a researcher, and as a teacher. So
I agree. Man, I loved it. I really did. Okay, so let's see. If you like the outro music, it's Clutch Gone Cold. That's intro and outro music, so you can check them out online, of course. We're big Clutch fans. Michelle's favorite band on earth, I think, actually.
Neil Fallon is one of my favorites.
You see, I love it when you say that. Yes, mine too. And if you want to keep checking us out, it's social-engineer.org and our corporate site, social-engineer.com. Twitter is SOC Engineer Inc. for the corporate. I'm Human Hacker, and Michelle is the Sultry Asian. No, I keep saying the. So it's Sultry Asian. There is no the before it.
Well, I am the, but.
Yes. Yeah, you are the Sultry Asian. Yes, that is true. But the Twitter handle is just Sultry Asian. If you're on IRC still, it's irc.freenode.net, channel social-engineer. So until next month, we'll see you.
Can't seem to recall any given name. I see the footprints, how they come, how they go. Was that only a moment, or many years ago? My heart is gone,